I'm Gregory Rockman. People call me Rocky nowadays on the street. I'm a policeman serving in the South African Police Department. I'm a lieutenant, and you're watching South Africa now.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa.
It doesn't exist on television, and it doesn't exist.
I would actually appeal to the world that information is there and can be found.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
This week, South Africa Now presents these stories. The Tears of Natal. Vigilante violence is claiming thousands of lives in a war that's not being reported.
We're between 2,500 and 3,000 deaths in the last 3 years. I don't believe it's accurate to describe it as black-on-black violence. There's several causes, and one of the causes is most definitely the involvement of the security forces.
He became a hero during the Defiance campaign for criticizing the government. He's South African Police Lieutenant Gregory Rockman. And in a special South Africa Now interview, he speaks out once again.
For me, whether they send me to jail or whether they assassinate me or whatever the government is going to do to me, I'm not concerned. But what I'm concerned is that justice prevails at the end of the day in South Africa.
And in our culture section, South Africa's Joshua blows his horn. Only his name is Hugh Masekela.
I'm a South African first. I'm an oppressed South African. I'm one 32 millionth of 32 million people who are oppressed. The fact that I'm a musician is just a coincidence.
All these stories and more. But first, the uncensored news with Fana Kakana and Carlin Craven.
Dumelang. Reunited. Walter Sisulu and a delegation of free political prisoners were in Zambia to meet with the leaders of the African National Congress at their command post in exile in Lusaka. Sisulu and his wife, Albertina, received a grand send-off at Jan Smuts Airport in Johannesburg. Before his departure, Sisulu told South Africa Now that he was looking forward to seeing his son Max for the first time in 27 years.
Well, I am excited about the trip because I'm going to meet many of my colleagues I last saw, others more than 30 years ago, others more than 26 years ago. And I have, in addition, my son, who also I'm going to meet for the first time in 27 years. And also my daughter, I've last seen 15 years ago.
Meanwhile, at the ANC conference, discussions centered on clarifying the organization's political strategy for negotiations, though some of the members are reluctant to begin talks with the government's military wing. High on the agenda was the 10-point proposal for terms for negotiations sent by Nelson Mandela. We'll have more on this story next week.
There are more rumors and frustration in the press corps as the Mandela Watch goes into high gear. One newspaper reports that Mandela is already free to leave prison grounds. London's Mail on Sunday claims that Mandela has been seen cycling around country roads, making visits to his doctor, and even Christmas shopping in Cape Town. Mandela was able to venture out sight unseen because, according to reporter Chester Stern, very few people have seen the modern-day Nelson Mandela.
He now is much slimmer. His hair is almost white, he's clean-shaven, and he really doesn't look at all like the picture that we all imagine him to look like. And that has afforded him a good deal of freedom and enabled him to move around unrecognized.
One person who has seen him is leading anti-apartheid activist Helen Joseph. She recently visited him for the first time in 28 years.
That's a long time, it's a long time. But he's just the same Nelson that he always was. Bright, fresh, friendly, loving, and he was very excited, and so was I, to see him after so long. And his message to the outside world is we must push on, and we must find ways and means of achieving some sort of reconciliation between our people and the government. but not at the cost, any cost to the ANC.
As the press gets ready for Mandela's release, so does Jesse Jackson, who has been given a visa to visit South Africa for the first time since 1979. Jackson told South Africa Now about his hopes for South Africa's future.
We really look forward in South Africa to reconstruction and redevelopment and reconciliation, and not just bloodshed. I hope that now that people like ANC leadership is being freed, that it will be the time to go to the bargaining table and leave the battlefield and choose negotiation over confrontation. It's a civilized thing to do. It's the morally correct thing to do, and it will be effective.
The United Democratic Front, the umbrella for anti-apartheid organizations totaling an estimated 2 million people, was established in 1983 and banned in 1985. But last week at a press conference in Johannesburg, the UDF declared itself back in business. Our cameras were there. At its height, the United Democratic Front was capable of mobilizing hundreds of thousands of activists and was viewed as an internal political expression of the African National Congress. After protesting its banning for years, the organization has unbanned itself.
In what we see as a challenging period ahead of us, we have decided to claim our right to engage in open opposition activity.
The very methods which we employ, which are non-violent in nature, have the cutting edge of exerting more and more pressure on the government to open more democratic space.
We had to make a choice as to whether we would allow the regime to repress and silence us, or we should carry out our responsibility to our people as the United Democratic Front and its leadership. And we have chosen the side of the people.
The government has now invited the UDF to apply to legalize itself, a proposition the movement has rejected.
A virtual war now engulfs South Africa's Natal region. More people have died in Natal in the past 2 years than in Beirut, and over 100 since the new year began. The fighting in Natal remains one of South Africa's least covered and understood stories. This week, we offer a special report on the continuing violence in Natal. Philip Tomlinson has the story and footage not seen elsewhere.
This is Durban, the largest city of South Africa's Natal region, and one of the fastest growing in the world. Known for its sparkling beaches, which have all recently been opened to South Africa's blacks, Durban's calm exterior is dotted by reminders of the cost of maintaining apartheid. Metal detectors in shopping malls are a response to frequent bombings. Weapons displays warn against so-called terrorist attacks. Outside of Durban, in the so-called homeland of KwaZulu, funerals like this one demonstrate the real cost of apartheid and its system of homelands. Often called black-on-black violence, the source of the conflict is political. A virtual war now exists between two forces. One is Inkatha, made up of supporters of Zulu chief Gatsha Buthelezi, who supports the homelands policy, and the other includes followers of the United Democratic Front and the Congress of South African Trade Unions, who are fighting to abolish apartheid structures. Recently, Buthelezi pledged to work for peace.
We are appealing for an end to the senseless killing that has been taking place in our communities.
But Buthelezi's autocratic control of Natal's scarce resources is a primary cause of the violence sweeping Natal, says Tandeka Gubuli, a native of Natal who writes for the South African newspaper, The Weekly Mail.
First, it's a scramble for scarce resources in living areas. It's also largely an ideological struggle between those who would like to maintain the system, and especially the system of the KwaZulu government and its homeland structures, and those who would not. And the battle lines are there.
Local police who support Inkatha are said to be fueling the conflict and are accused of murdering this 21-year-old man. Christina Scott runs Durban News and regularly reports from Natal's townships.
We were covering a political funeral, a series of political funerals in KwaMashu Township, including several people who reportedly were killed by KwaZulu police, working with pro and Kata vigilantes. And at the funeral, the police tried to order the mourners to pull the coffins out of the graves, and when a Democratic Party unrest monitor tried to intervene, tried to negotiate, tried to calm the situation down, the police lost their temper and took out assault rifles and pointed them at the journalists who were watching this and pointed them at the unrest monitors and said, "You have 5 minutes. We're going to shoot you."
Our group has been to funerals every weekend this year so far. Yesterday we buried in Natal, at least in my region, about 10 people. The weekend before we buried 5 or 6 people in KwaMashu alone. And the weekend before that there were also funerals in most of the centers in our region. So it's an occurrence that we find every weekend. There's several causes, and one of the causes is most definitely the involvement of the security forces and involvement of white members of this SAP. I'm not saying the entire SAP is involved, but I am saying that there's evidence that at least right-wing elements, white right-wing elements of the security forces are involved in the violence and in fact could be orchestrating some of the violence.
And leaders of the United Democratic Front are pledging to go to Natal to work toward ending the violence, which has claimed more than 2,000 lives in 3 years. For South Africa Now, this is Philip Tomlinson reporting.
As Africa's last colony, Namibia, moves closer toward independence, disagreement continues over the drafting of the Constitution. Here with our weekly Namibia Watch report is Joseph Disho.
I'm Joseph Disho with Namibia Watch. The news in Namibia is still focused on the shape of the country's first constitution, with some provisions still generating controversy. This newspaper report, which published a draft version of the proposed constitution, sparked public concern. Gwen Lister, editor of the Namibian, told us that's why she published a leaked copy.
We felt that the present sitting of the Constituent Assembly has been limited to discussions within the Standing Committee, where matters are kept behind closed doors and the public are not aware of what is being said or what is being discussed about the Constitution. So we thought we would publish the draft in the interest that the public could have some knowledge about what the final independence constitution would look like.
Namibia's constitution is shaped by these delegates, some of them former guerrilla fighters. It includes a Bill of Rights, guaranteeing affirmative action, workers' rights, conscientious objection, the elimination of the death penalty, and an independent judiciary. At issue is whether the government should be allowed preventive detention, a power that could be abused. A member of the legislature, Peter Kachavivi, told us the issue is being resolved.
I cannot understand why there should be any misunderstanding about the issues which have been discussed, agreed on by the Standing Committee. Likewise, the issues of detention without trial, as far as I can recall, was clearly discussed and agreed upon that it was going to be done away with.
Given what's happening, when do you think can we expect independence?
I think the overwhelming majority of my colleagues in the House are talking about mid-March, or at least at the end of March.
This is Joseph Disho with Namibia Watch.
The unofficial English cricket team left for their rebel tour of South Africa, even though they will face a 4-year ban from the important Test cricket matches. In South Africa, angry demonstrators protested their visit, delaying the team's arrival at the airport. We have this report.
From early morning, several hundred protesters gathered to meet the rebel tourists, but police mounted roadblocks to restrict their numbers and pen them into a confined area of the airport. Then, without warning or apparent provocation, the police set their dogs on the crowd. And in the stampede, police also used batons and tear gas spray. Several demonstrators were injured and 9 arrested. Among those tear gassed was Winnie Mandela, wife of the jailed nationalist leader Nelson Mandela. She condemned the police action.
We came here peacefully. None of us have got any arms on us, and we have been attacked officially by Mr. de Klerk's men.
The organizer of the tour promised to investigate the incidents.
And if the evidence is
to the effect that the demonstrations were peaceful and they were broken up, we will express our unhappiness in known circumstances.
When, 3 hours late, Gatting and the 15 other players arrived, there were no demonstrators in sight. Told of the violence, Gatting insisted the tour would go ahead.
Well, obviously we weren't here at the time of the demonstration, and obviously we hope that demonstrations will be peaceful. Obviously, we're unhappy that if it was a peaceful demonstration that it was disrupted, but I'm sure the SACU will take it up with the authorities who are concerned.
But the players who've ended their international careers to come here know they can expect further black protests throughout their controversial stay. The unprovoked police action shows that whatever the cricket authorities say about allowing peaceful protest and demonstration, the South African police are always liable to react rather differently. And that hardly bodes well for a tour which is yet to begin.
You're watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines.
Remember Gregory Rockman? He's the South African police lieutenant who became a hero overnight for publicly criticizing brutality by fellow officers. Rockman himself has had some rocky times since then. South Africa Now tracked him down to see how he's doing. Naja Smith reports.
The South African police has earned an international reputation for its brutal enforcement of the apartheid system. But last year, from within its ranks, emerged an unlikely popular hero. Lieutenant Gregory Rockman spoke out publicly against the injustices he had witnessed, action that brought him massive popular support, but also arrest and suspension from the force. South Africa Now recently sat down with Lieutenant Rockman for an exclusive interview and asked what had motivated him to speak out.
I was always up against the government and up against the unjust. So I just thought to myself, I had enough. And, you know, there's a time in your life that you reach a stage where you feel enough is enough. And that was it. The police force has been given our license to just go about and beat up people. Because if you actually give a police force such vast powers to exercise, you know, most definitely they're going to abuse them, which is happening now in South Africa. They're abusing their powers instead of using them, you know, in a proper sense.
I don't want you to get hurt. I'll see to that you don't get hurt. Peacefully go back to your schools.
Rockman first received attention several months ago during the Defiance campaign, when he addressed a protest rally and spoke out against police violence.
At first, you know, I actually did my job as a policeman, and when I actually reached out my hand, it was to sort of quieten the crowds down, to speak to them. But for me, it was wonderful in the sense to see how people actually accept a policeman, whereas we were always seen, you know, when in the uniform, we were connected to the regime and being rejected by our own people, and there we were acceptable to them. It is wonderful. That is how a policeman should be acceptable amongst his community, and that is how it should be.
As a result of his emergence as a visible critic of apartheid, Rockman became a target for retaliation. First he was arrested and then suspended from the force. However, he has not been idle. In fact, Rockman has detailed his experiences in a book that has just been published.
Well, the book, as you can see here, it reads One Man's Crusade Against Apartheid Police. It's not, for me, it's not controversial why I've said that, because it is as such, you know, all the discrimination that I went through and the unjust system that still exists, so the title suits the book. But I think it's important, you know, for everybody to make their own conclusions, but what they will see inside of this book is the truth, what I actually went through, you know, and how I had to fight against this evil system.
Since being suspended, Lieutenant Rockman has also organized the Union for Police and Prison Workers, known as POP Crew, the Police and Civil Rights Union, the first ever of its kind.
Mainly what we're going to fight for is to phase out all discriminations within the various departments, and also, you know, the basic human rights for all its members. But the wonderful part that we also have brought into our constitution is to fight, you know, to uphold the basic human rights of all the people of South Africa too, because we feel if we want to project a better image of ourselves as police and prison departments, we should look after the interests of the people that we are serving to, which the government of the day is not doing.
We asked Rockman about the continuing controversy over the charges that police units have been part of the death squads that have murdered anti-apartheid activists.
I wasn't surprised, not the least, because before these hit squads came out, I'm in possession of an affidavit of one of the policemen, that works down in the Cape. He was interrogated by the security branch, and then after a couple of weeks they followed him and they attempt to take his life. So even before they actually came out, I knew about these things, you see. And I mean, happening to a policeman, not even civilians. It didn't surprise me, because this government is up to anything to protect apartheid. And now the world can actually see how evil apartheid is really.
Rockman himself has been threatened for his outspokenness, but says that will not stop him.
For me, whether they send me to jail or whether they assassinate me or whatever the government is going to do to me, I'm not concerned. But what I'm concerned is that justice prevails at the end of the day in South Africa. Because I feel, that justice is more worth to me than me, serving a jail sentence. Because what I am doing now is revealing all the unjust, to the people of South Africa, which was actually concealed before. And I'm just scratching out and opening all this unjust to them so that they can see what is going on within these various departments. So I think we owe the people of South Africa and the world the truth, and that is what we are doing now.
You're watching South Africa Now. Coming up next, our culture segment, featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expression from Southern Africa.
When you mention South African music, one of the first names you think of is Hugh Masekela with his mix of township rhythms and modern jazz. Here he is at a recent benefit concert. The song is a familiar one, a playful melody that became for some an anthem that defined the times and emotions for both South Africans and Americans. Grazing in the Grass was the international hit of 1968, and for trumpeter Hugh Masekela, it became his signature song. But the sounds didn't stop there. 22 years later, he's still making music. While it's been over 30 years that he's been in exile, Masekela still stands firmly against what he calls an attempt to sell to the world an image of a kinder and gentler apartheid.
I want everything that de Klerk has opportunities to have. It's as simple, as simple as I'm sure everybody likes to have the privileges that de Klerk has without having to oppress anybody. All the positive things. All the negative characteristics of the Afrikaners we don't want, and we want to re-educate them probably to become human beings. We've been very patient with them, and all we're asking is all everybody's asking is to have the same opportunities that they have.
Born 50 years ago in Witbank, South Africa, Masekela's parents' extensive record collection ignited his musical instincts. It was a constant exposure to African as well as African-American culture that would shape his artistic career.
When I was a kid and I was listening to the Modernaires or the Pied Pipers or Nat King Cole, I could sing along with his records, I could sing along with Mona Lisa, but I didn't know 75% of what he was singing about. I knew it was a love song, but we could just at any street corner start the song Mona Lisa and everybody would harmonize.
In the 60s and 70s, following the success of Grazing in the Grass, Masekela made a pilgrimage of music that took him on a search of more traditional sounds throughout the continent of Africa.
Mostly you'll find that musicians come from the people, so usually they represent the opinions of the downtrodden. You know, there are a few reactionary musicians in the world. I won't mention any names, but in general, you find that musicians are basically like come from the activist part of their populations, and they come usually from the poor side of town, or like represent the opinions of the people who are exploited. Everybody in South Africa is political. I don't know anybody in South Africa who is not political, from the oppressors to the oppressed. As soon as you realize what's happening in South Africa when you're 3 or 4 years old, it's very clear to you when you're an African there that you're oppressed, and from that time you're political. I don't know any country actually where where anybody is not a politician. It's just that some people like to evade it. You know, I mean, it's a joke. Some people say, well, you're an artist, you shouldn't be into politics, you know. So it seems like artists are privileged not to be affected by the brutalities of the world. I'm one 32 millionth of 32 million people who are oppressed. The fact that I'm a musician is just a coincidence.
Thank you for watching South Africa Now. We are grateful to our viewers who continue to respond to our financial crisis. For more information on the issues we cover, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, P.O. Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York 10013. South Africa Now is produced by Global Vision on a non-profit basis in association with the Africa Fund, a tax-exempt organization providing assistance and relief to victims of apartheid. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of everyone at South Africa Now, I'm Fana Kekana. See you next week.
South Africa Now is also supported by public television viewers like you.